Week 2 of the fantasy football season, and his wide receiver starts it. The first start, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. So Drake London, no doubt about it. It was a bad ball game. And for the Falcons offense in general, besides Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, no one in the passing game did much. 2 catches, 15 yards in the Week 1 loss versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Kirk Cousins definitely looked rusty and needs to get his legs under him. But Week 2, a pretty decent matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 2 on Monday Night Football, where the Eagles just got torched by Jaden Reed and the Green Bay Packers. Even though the Eagles won the game 34-29, I believe this could be an up and down the field matchup between both teams. So Drake London, definitely a talented wide receiver. It was just a bad Week 1, where Steelers still one of the better defenses, I believe, in the league. But this week with a good matchup and trying to rebound, I think London goes out there, has a bounce-back performance. Next start, Marvin Harrison of the Arizona Cardinals. Harrison only 1 catch, 4 yards in the Week 1 loss at the Buffalo Bills. And to end the game, he was wide open, running into the end zone, but Kyler Murray missed him, and obviously didn't even throw it towards Marvin Harrison. So this week, a middle-of-the-pack matchup versus the Rams. I know the Rams had a good game plan, and Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't do much in that Week 1 ball game versus the Rams, but Jameson Williams went out there and had a monster performance. So Marvin Harris, a lot of routes run. He was on the field 90% of the time. And this week versus the Rams, I think he bounces back and has a big ball game. Next start, Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns. Amari Cooper, it was a bad game versus former team, the Dallas Cowboys, in Week 1. And him and Deshaun Watson, I'll admit it, they're just not on the same page and hitting and making plays. Even Cooper dropped a pass where he would add a touchdown to definitely salvage and have a decent fantasy day in Week 1. But Week 2, a decent matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars, where Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill both went over 100 yards in that ball game. And I think this secondary is vulnerable. And Amari Cooper, he usually don't have bad games in a row. So I think he bounces back. I think this Brown offense will look a little bit better, because this Jacksonville defense isn't even close to where the Cowboys defense is. Domination the Cowboys defense played versus the Browns in Week 1. So I think this week Cooper bounces back. Next start, Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. Ladd McConkey, a good debut with 14.5 fantasy points in PPR leagues, finding the end zone. And he looked like the number 1 wide receiver in terms of targets and playing out of the slot for the Los Angeles Chargers. And him and Justin Herbert already have a good rapport. So McConkey, like I said, he's going to get a lot of targets. He knows how to get open. And Justin Herbert, I still think, is a top 10 quarterback in terms of talent, even though there's not a lot of talent around him now this season. But this is a cupcake matchup. I know it's a West Coast team traveling across country at the Carolina Panthers, but I don't think it matters. And I think Ladd McConkey, once again, could go out there and make some plays, because we saw Carolina just give up 47 points to the Saints. Next start, Malik Nabers of the New York Giants. Malik Nabers, talented rookie, obviously not a great landing spot, and the New York Giants got blown out in the season opener versus the Minnesota Vikings. But this week, a good matchup with the Commanders that just got torched by Mike Evans, who scored 2 touchdowns, and Chris Godwin had 83 yards and a touchdown versus them. So even with Daniel Jones, who's one of the worst starting quarterbacks in all the NFL this season, Malik Nabers still had 5 catches, 66 yards, and this could be an up and down the field type of game or a defensive matchup. But Nabers, with his talent, I think could overcome the bad play of Daniel Jones. And if he can make the most out of the few targets and catches he gets a game, the next start, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. So clearly he was the number 1 option in the passing game early in that game. And then Isaiah Likely emerged in the second half for this Baltimore Raven team. And this week, a nice matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, where their defense really can't stop anyone. And Zay Flowers, he's getting a lot of targets, a lot of bubble routes, and even jet sweeps and end arounds. They've used them in formations over the last season, where it's his second year in the league. Zay Flowers, he's a dynamic wide receiver. He's a burner. And this week in a home opener in a ball game where Baltimore wants to bounce back, I believe he goes out there and has a good performance in the final start. Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. I know Hollywood Brown, there's a possibility he's going to return in this game. Rashee Rice, he looked good in the opener, going over 100 yards. But Worthy did find the end zone twice. And there's one thing we know about the NFL. You can't teach speed. And Xavier Worthy, on a jet sweep, his first play in the NFL, scored a touchdown. And then down the sideline later on in the game, scoring a touchdown on a deep ball. So I know it was a little bit fluky, only a few touches he had in the ball game when he scored 2 touchdowns. But like I said, he's going to be in their worst case 3 wide receiver sets. Him and Mahomes, it seems like, already have a good rapport. And this week in a good matchup, where this possibly could be an up and down the field type of matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals. even though the Bengals, we know, only scored 10 points versus the New England Patriots. I think Worthy, he could get behind that secondary and make a play or two. Now to this hits Deontay Johnson of the Carolina Panthers. So this Panther team, pretty much there's no one on this roster I would have confidence in and week out to start in my fantasy roster. Maybe when Jonathan Brooks comes off the PUP list, but right now I just don't have confidence. Deontay Johnson last week, I didn't even rank him in my top 36 at the wide receiver position, and he put in a stinker just like this whole Carolina Panther team did in week 1 at the New Orleans Saints. So Johnson, I know it's not a crazy bad matchup versus the Chargers, but the Chargers defense did a good job on Devontae Adams, holding him to 5 catches, 59 yards in week 1, and I just don't see Deontay Johnson having a big game next to Calvin Ridley of the Tennessee Titans. So Calvin Ridley, he had a quiet game, 8 points in PPR leagues, and this week a tough matchup versus the New York Jets, where most likely Sauce Gardner, at least half of the ball game, I think is going to be on Calvin Ridley. And this Tennessee team, they had trouble versus the Bears defense, which I think is a middle-of-the-pack type of defense. Just imagine what they're going to do versus this New York Jet team with a good pass rush, C.J. Mosley, Quinton Williams, and then, like I said, Sauce Gardner in the secondary, Michael Carter as well. So I just don't see Calvin Ridley doing much. And like I said, Will Levis, I had hopes coming into the season he could be good for Calvin Ridley, but so far I know it was only 1 week. It didn't look good at all. The next hit, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. JSN, he didn't do much in week 1. He only had a few catches, under 4 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Tyler Lockett had a nice game. DK Metcalf made some plays. Kenneth Walker, though, for the most part, him and Charbonnet in the backfield did the majority of the scoring for this Seattle Seahawks team. And this week could be a trap type of ball game. We saw New England week 1 hold down Cincinnati to 10 points, even though I know Jamar Chase wasn't 100% and T. Higgins was out in that game in week 1. But Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's still third on that depth chart. And there's going to be weeks he puts up points and then weeks like we saw last week. So this week, with Seattle going into New England, where I think it's going to be a run-heavy type of ball game. With a middle-of-the-pack matchup versus the New England Patriots. Like I said, their defense went out there and looked good in week 1 at the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't think Jackson Smith-Njigba is really going to be a fantasy option. Next hit, Rashid Shaheed of the New Orleans Saints. Shaheed even go back to last season. He was a home run hitting, deep ball threat or nothing. And this week, a tough matchup with the Dallas Cowboys that pretty much shut down this whole offense for the Cleveland Browns until garbage time in the late third, early fourth quarter. So Shaheed, he got a nice long touchdown in the week 1 blowout victory versus the Carolina Panthers. But this week with a tough matchup with the Dallas Cowboys, and especially their secondary has been one of the better secondaries the last couple seasons, with Trevion Diggs back in the lineup as well, even though he's going to be on Chris Olave. I don't think Shaheed does it again. He's a sit. The next sit, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. So this week, not a horrible matchup with the Miami Dolphins, but I just don't believe Shakir is going to have enough volume week in and week out. Last week, 3 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown on only 3 targets. And this week, what's the probability he's going to get peppered with 10, 15 targets and get a good workload once again? So like I said, last week he only had the 3 catches on the 3 targets, found the end zone. So that's definitely a fluky number. And this Miami Dolphin team on the slot, Christian Kirk, in week 1, he only had 30 yards in that ball game. So I think this week, Khalil Shakir, he's going to have to find the end zone once again to have fantasy value. And it's not a lock he will. So he's a sit next to Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. So now with Malik Willis at quarterback, there's not going to be many options. Maybe Jaden Reed at best will be a back-end receiver or flex option for fantasy owners. But Christian Watson last week, his week was saved by a short touchdown pass from Jordan Love at the 3-yard line on a slant route, where he only finished with 10.30 fantasy points. And if he didn't score that touchdown, he would have had no value. And now with Jordan Love out of the lineup and Willis not much of a passer, he's more of a run-first quarterback from what we've seen of him so far in his brief stint in the NFL. I don't think Christian Watson is going to fit with Malik Willis well. We know Christian Watson's a deep ball threat and a game-breaking type of wide receiver. And this week in a matchup versus Indianapolis, where I know their defense that great, with Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, just put a number on them. I think Watson still doesn't do much in this ball game, and it's going to be tough overall for Green Bay to move the football. In the final sits, Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. week 1 outplayed Christian Kirk. He only had 1 catch, 30 yards on 4 targets. This week, a tougher matchup versus the Cleveland Browns, where, believe it or not, I know the Browns lost 33-17 in week 1 versus the Dallas Cowboys, but the Cowboys defense put their offense for the most part in good situations, where CeeDee Lamb, he had a decent ball game, nothing over the top, especially for a talent like Lamb. And Brandon Cooks did find the end zone, but besides that, there wasn't much going on in that Cowboy offense, where Dak had under 200 yards thrown. So this week in a tough matchup versus one of the better defenses in the league. Like I said, that Cowboy defense just put them in good position, and that's why they put up points. But I don't believe Jacksonville defense is on the level to put their offense in good positions. And I think Christian Kirk, once again, his ceiling's pretty low with Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis there, who outworked and put up better numbers in week 1. Wide receiver starts it for week 2 of the fantasy football season.